Debra Hilstrom lives in Brooklyn Center, where she served on the Planning Commission and City Council. She's beginning her 6th term in the Minnesota House of Representatives, representing District 46B. Now, the Democrats were only controlling the House since 2006, so the House swings back and forth, and you've been in the minority before, haven't you?
Yes, when I was first elected to the Minnesota House, I was in the minority, and then we were in the majority for 4 years during my tenure in the legislature.
Democratic Visions is handmade in Eden Prairie and Minnetonka by DFL Senate District 42.
What do you envision your role as Deputy Minority Leader going forward?
Well, one of the important things for any leader is to make certain that we are bringing DFL principles and the voice of Democrats to the debate. So the debate isn't just about what the Republicans' agenda is, but giving people a choice and making certain that ordinary Minnesotans' views are brought to the table for discussion. We will be making certain to stand up for working Minnesotans and making sure that the budget crisis isn't balanced on the backs of the middle class.
How are you going to do that? It looks to me like the Republicans are bound and determined to simply cut and slash with no consideration to raising revenue.
We know what an all-cuts budget looks like. And it's going to be very important that we continue to show what an all-cuts budget is going to mean. The middle class has seen an increase in fees. They've seen an increase in property taxes.
75%?
And they have seen a reduction in services. And we need to make certain that the Republicans understand the consequences and that Minnesotans are aware of what the consequences would be for an all-cuts budget.
What do you think the prospects are of being actually heeded by the Republican majority as you go forward?
Well, today they made promises that they wanted to hear what we had to say and work together. You heard Governor Dayton's speech. He said, "We all do better when we all do better." That's really important for everyone to work towards. And an all-cuts budget really means working families pay more and get less. They also see, as you know, increases in property taxes, increases in tuition, increases in fees. That's just not going to be acceptable.
Let's focus in on one aspect of government spending, local government aid. Now, does Brooklyn Center receive local government aid? And if they do, how is the city going to cope if the Republicans carry forward with their plan to slash such aid to cities?
Well, local government aid is a very important piece. Brooklyn Center actually does, in fact, benefit from local government aid. Brooklyn Park does not. Many cities across the state benefit from local government aid, and mostly it's used to pay for police and fire services. As the former chair of the Public Safety Committee, we heard over and over again from law enforcement the impacts that cuts to local government aid would have. The other areas that are going to be very important is jobs in the economy, as you know. We need to make certain that as we're talking about jobs, we're talking about good paying jobs, not just low paying jobs. We need to make certain that Minnesotans have access to jobs where they can pay a mortgage and they can pay for the basic needs that Minnesotans know.
Do you envision that in the attempt to balance the budget without raising revenue, which is what the House Republican leadership says is going to happen, that there will be an impact on higher education?
Well, there has been an impact to higher education already. More and more students are going back because people are not working. And so even if you don't increase and you don't increase spending at all, we're already starting to see layoffs in the higher education institutions. We need a well-trained workforce, and that starts with early education as well all the way up through higher education. And if you cut and slash those things, then you make those things not available. And businesses say over and over again that they need to have a well-trained workforce. We need to make certain that middle-class Minnesotans are not squeezed out of the opportunity for higher education.
The House is presently 72 Republicans, 62 Democrats. How are you going to swing those 6 votes that you need to regain control of the Minnesota House in the 2012 election?
Well, I think it's going to be very important that Minnesotans understand what's going on at the Capitol and that Minnesotans have a clear choice about priorities. Where do we want to invest the hard-earned dollars in Minnesota? We have promised that education is a priority. Now, the Republicans have also promised that education will be a priority. They claim they are not going to cut, and it is going to be our job to hold them accountable for the promises that they make.
Well, I enjoyed Governor Dayton's statement that if the Republicans had a bill that would resolve the budget crisis without undermining education, public safety, and the necessity of the state to support the needs of the disabled, to bring it on, and he'd sign it immediately. I don't imagine that's going to happen, and I think what you're going to see is a lot of hard work and a lot of rhetoric with the intent of trying to put the governor in a bad position.
It is important to know that Governor Dayton is a backstop to protect the things that Minnesotans believe are essential to the quality of life here in Minnesota. If the Republicans are willing to compromise and work together, there is a way to work on a vision together. If folks want to posture and make political speeches, that will make it more challenging. So it's our job to make certain that Minnesotans expect us to lead. Minnesotans expect us to get the job done.
Can you give us just a breakdown? I mean, I know that you're Deputy Minority Leader, and that's second to Paul Thiessen, are you not?
Correct.
So how do you and Paul plan to divvy up that responsibility?
Paul and I have different strengths, and Paul will utilize me as a Deputy Minority Leader to highlight some of the areas that I can bring strengths to. I'm a very good organizer. I'm a very good delegator. I'm good at bringing people together. Paul is a wonderful leader. He's great at bringing folks to the table for discussion. He's great at leading us, and so hopefully the two of us will be able to work well to hold the Republicans accountable for the promises that they're making to Minnesotans, as well as present a vision to Minnesotans for what it would look like under a DFL-controlled House and Senate in 2012.
Does the House Minority Leadership have a role to play going forward as respects trying to reattain a majority status? Do you work with candidates in suburban areas and across the state to help them devise effective strategies to be elected?
We don't do campaign things at the Capitol. That is outside, out of the DFL headquarters. Absolutely, bringing our message, recruiting candidates, working together so that they understand what we're doing at the Capitol, so that they can have a great vision for the people they want to represent as well.
The New York Times recently had an article that Republican-dominated states, where the governor and the two houses of the legislature, it's a bicameral legislation, we're going to take on public unions. Do you envision a similar move in Minnesota, even though, of course, we still have Mark Dayton there as a backstop to stop any particularly egregious activity on the part of the legislature?
Well, I believe that if you're going to do an all-cuts budget, you are going to be cutting state government. You're going to be cutting local units of government by cutting local government aid. That means you're either going to have our residents pay more, or you're not going to have those positions, those jobs, and those services provided by the state. And so I believe that cutting 20+% of the state budget is going to result in cuts and layoffs.
Do you envision that we're going to see constitutional amendments come out of the Republican-controlled legislature?
You can expect that there will be many constitutional amendments offered, because anything that the Republicans want to get past Governor Dayton, all they have to do is pass it as a constitutional amendment.
No veto.
There is no veto of a constitutional amendment, and you only need a simple majority of the members of both bodies. Representative Hilstrom has talked about being very excited to bring those constitutional amendments forward. He is the chair of the Civil Law Committee, for which I do serve.
And what have you heard? Can you put any legs on that as to what kind of amendments? I mean, anti-gay marriage, I suspect, is one. Any issue that would kowtow to some of the more radical Republicans, I suspect, is one thing that they'd promote. And another is, I suppose, anything that they might think would enhance the prospects of beating Senator Klobuchar in 2012 by having some divisive issues on the ballot, I suspect might be in the offing also. Do you disagree with that?
I don't disagree.
Now, we had a recount recently, and there were several seats that were at stake where the vote total was less than the 1% for the House. My understanding is that the actual difference across the state between the Democrats being in the majority and in the minority was very small. Is that correct?
That's correct. You know, we've been hearing from a number of bloggers across the state that many Republicans believe that this was a referendum on their social agenda. I don't believe that to be the case. The difference between Democrats being in control in the Minnesota House and Republicans being in control in the Minnesota House is less than 400 votes.
No way.
Yes.
Boy. Well, in 2012, President Obama will be back on the ticket. Amy Klobuchar will be on the ticket. There should be a massive turnout again, I would hope, and that's got to be good for Democrat fortunes.
I believe it will be.
Good. Well, Debra, thank you for stopping by. It's always nice to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
Democratic Visions is produced by volunteers from Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, and Edina. It's just one example of how people come together to make a difference.
Democratic Visions is handmade in Eden Prairie and Minnetonka by DFL Senate District 42. Norbert Gernes, Chair. Democratic Visions can also be seen on our website, dflsd42.org.